Hello AS, welcome to your final mark scheme video that you're going to look at this year. I'm sure you're absolutely devastated about that. So the purpose of this paper was to give you the feel of a whole full paper 2 before you did the real exam at the end of the year. So what I really want you to think about and look at is the mark scheme and how it works here. Okay, don't worry too much about how you've done. It doesn't matter. What I'm more interested in is you can identify something that you would do differently in your real exam. Okay, know that. Right, so, which of the following statements best describes Wundt's use of the term introspection? So the first one you've got explaining behaviour by studying the biological basis of cognitive functions. It talks about the biological basis, so we're not interested. Wundt wasn't interested in biological basis. Explain behaviour without the need to consider thoughts and feelings. Wundt was the first person to consider thoughts and feelings within behaviour. That's why psychology became an independent science from philosophy. Investigating external events through observation and measurement. Well, as you know, we're looking at thoughts and feelings, so you can't directly measure it. You've got to make inferences, you've got to make assumptions because internal mental processes are not directly observable, so therefore it won't be that one either. So it must be D, investigating internal events, which it is because it's investigating our thoughts and feelings by examining conscious thoughts and feelings. There we go. And of course C talks about external events, so it couldn't be that one either. So just make sure you understand why it's D and not the other three. Okay. Next, discuss Wundt's role in the emergence of psychology as a science. So some of the information you can briefly put down is about Wundt himself, but the real focus is on the emergence of psychology as a science. So he was the father of psychology because he moved from his philosophical roots to controlled research. He set up the first lab, which the big focus there, if you talk about the lab, you must mention about the fact you would do experimental research in it. Structuralism or reductionism, and that's absolutely fine too, you can use the term reductionism if you feel more comfortable, breaking down behaviours into their basic elements. Wundt was the first person to do this within psychology, so thinking about internal mental thought processes, the way we think and the way that affects how we behave. And when he's broken it down, reductionism, it then allows us to study it. And he promoted the use of introspection as a way of studying internal mental processes. So again, studying it's all about, and that's why psychology became a science, because it's all about conducting research. And his research paved the way for later controlled research and the study of mental processes by, as you now know, cognitive psychologists. The examiner's report said some of the responses here were limited because they looked at described who Wundt was, not the role that he played. So make sure you're not just describing him, make sure that you're telling me something about experimental research and how we move psychology forward. Okay, this one was generally well answered in the exam last year, so fingers crossed you did well too. 1 mark for mentioning the gland, 1 mark for telling me something about it. So you've got the thyroid gland. I'm guessing most of you went for the adrenal gland, so secretes adrenaline and controls the sympathetic division of the fight or flight response, or the pituitary gland, so causes other glands to secrete hormones or directly produces effects. Okay. Which of the following statements is the best description of overt observation? The researcher becomes a member of the group, so therefore that would be participant, so not overt. The researcher uses a structured procedure, something called structured observation we've not looked at because we don't need to, but we've never talked about in overt having a structured procedure. The researcher watches and records behaviour set in a setting that would normally occur, that would be natural, so again not the best description of overt. The researcher watches and records behaviour of a group that knows it's being observed. Overt, obvious, covert, undercover, so you know that. Okay, briefly describe one way in which a covert observation of children might be more beneficial. So because it uses the phrase more beneficial than an overt observation, you must have comparison between covert and overt. If you haven't drawn any comparison, then you don't get any marks. Okay, so can you pause and can you check that you have drawn comparisons? So can you read your book, your answer, and can you check, have you talked about have you mentioned covert and have you mentioned overt? If you haven't, then you don't get any marks, which is fine, just remember it for the next exam. And of course observation of children, so has it contextualized? So again, can you skim through and can you see if you've mentioned the word children? If you have, that's all you need. So for example, if the researcher is covert, then the children are completely unaware they're being monitored. You've done your application there and you've explained they're unaware they're being monitored, and this increases the likelihood likelihood of the behaviour that is produced being spontaneous and natural, so that would be the second mark, whereas in overt they are aware and their behaviour might be affected. They've drawn comparison. Contextualised, they've mentioned children, they've talked about natural behaviour, so that's why it's better, and then they've compared it to overt, which is where they're aware and their behaviour might be affected. So examiners report most students appear to have a good knowledge, however many failed to actually use this knowledge to answer the question of why covert may be more beneficial than overt. So there were many limited responses, but in the key bit at the bottom, but without comparison. So please make sure, if you see the word beneficial, if you see the word improve, there are 2 questions in this exam paper where you need to draw comparisons, and that's one of them. Explain why the researcher decided the sign test would be appropriate. Do not worry if this one threw you, okay? Because we now do it as a 2-year long course, we teach this bit in the second year. So if you had a good, the test with this one was if you had a good crack at it. If you attempted it, that's fantastic. That alone is enough for you to be pleased with yourself. And then you may get some marks or not. Don't worry if you didn't. If you didn't have a go at it, you need to make sure you answer every single question, okay? Just give it a go. It doesn't matter if it's wrong. You'd never lose marks. You might gain some. So again, can you just check if that you've answered it? Have you contextualised? If you've answered it and you've contextualised, whatever the answer, I'd like you to give yourself 1 mark. Okay, because that isn't how the mark scheme works, but I'm just pleased that you've given it a go. Okay, but the kind of things you would talk about, the researchers looking for a difference in helping behaviour. The study focused on a single group of children who were tested under both conditions, so the sign test can only be used in repeated measures. Using the sign test will allow the researchers to decide whether difference in helping behaviours are due to chance or real effect. This study produced quantitative numerical data, and the sign test is one way of analysing such data. Okay, and there's rules about particular tests and the designs for this rule meta. Don't panic if none of those make sense, but obviously if you answered it, you contextualise it. No matter what you said, you get a mark. Why are you using this test? So if this question ever comes up, we're going to look at this over the summer. Together for your summer task, but you would answer using the 3 Ds. You would tell me whether it was a difference or a correlation. So in the sign test case, it was a difference. You would tell me the design. So again, in the sign case, it would be repeated measures, and the data would be nominal, ordinal, or interval. If you're not familiar with those terms, don't worry. Sign test is nominal, but you don't need to worry about those because we'll do them in the second year. Okay, so apologies for that question. We've moved that onto the second year, but if you gave it a go, that's really good. Discuss the contributions of Pavlov's research into our understanding of human behaviour for 8 marks. So the really important thing here is human behaviour. Can you read through and circle everywhere you've mentioned human behaviour? So it's okay to mention Pavlov with the dogs, but only if you've talked about some kind of human behaviour. And the one that you know, or the 2 that you know that you could use, are attachment or phobias. Or you can make up your own. It doesn't really matter because you know about classical conditioning, but the key thing is human behaviour. So this is the mark scheme. You need to have knowledge of the contribution of Pavlov's research. It's got to be accurate and detailed. So that's AO1. Your discussion, so your evaluation is effective. So can you just check your evaluation points? Have you put a strength or weaknesses? Give it a tick. Example, give it a tick. This is an example because, give it a tick. This is a strength or a weakness because, give it a tick. If you've done a however, double tick. That's really, really good. If you've got all of that structuring for 2 evaluation points, then you're doing pretty well. Okay, obviously the content matters, but the structure's there too. So sometimes you can make mistakes, and that's fine. It's saying so don't beat yourself up if you've got the odd mistakes in there. The answer is clear and coherent, and specialist terminology is used effectively. So can you skim through your answer and underline specialist terminology? Classical conditioning, unconditioned response, conditioned response, neutral stimulus, blah, 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 all of those. Validity, any psychologically specialist terms, any terms you have learned in psychology. And the focus on contribution is explicit, so Pavlov's contribution. Okay, possible things you could have talked about then. So this one is slightly different from how you would have learned it in class. You need to develop it from there. So one of the key contributions of Pavlov is his methodology. So he demonstrated the importance of learning by association in his conditioning experiments. So again, one of the first few people to do conditioning experiments, particularly controlled experiments. That's really key. He was one of the first people to conduct research experimentally, again within psychology, and also controlled experiments. So if you think about how controlled it was, so having the tubes attached to the saliva glands, so they can measure it, keeping the dogs in identical conditions, all of those things. So, and he was also one of the first people who took information and data from non-human participants and used it to help understand things like attachment or the development of phobias. For example, I think they're the two key behaviours that you will have learnt there. So the key things about Pavlov: controlled research using non-human participants, only being prepared to look at observable behaviours. Okay, so there are three key things that Pavlov, his thought process, contributed to psychology. He developed the theory of classical conditioning, and you could explain that as well. So if you talked about classical conditioning related directly to human behaviours, then you can have the marks, okay? Or application. So I know normally we'd use this in AO3, and if you use it in AO3, that's absolutely fine. But one of the things that he did do, one of the contributions was he developed classical conditioning, which then led to the development of treatments and of phobias, okay? AO3, you've got supporting evidence with Pavlov's dogs, and practical application, systematic desensitisation of flooding, so you might have used that in AO1 or AO3. Evaluation of methodology, so it was a lab, it was controlled, only observable behaviours, difficulty with extrapolation, so you've got to talk about their the strengths and the weaknesses. So strengths of the lab is that it's controlled, why is that a strength? Difficulty is extrapolation, you can't take data from animals to humans. And the key thing, if you do that evaluation point, is what's the difference between humans and animals? You've got to make it clear. Is it to do with their free will, the fact they have emotions? Well, that's what we have, not animals, sorry. Also complex social networks. Animals have social networks, but we have extremely complex ones. And then contrast to alternatives. So whilst Pavlov did contribute a lot to psychology, something that he didn't consider was the biological approach. The key thing is you need to be talking about how Pavlov contributed and developed psychology. So think about that methodology, okay? And the examiner's report said students simply provided detailed accounts of Pavlov's salivation in dogs experiment. Well, you shouldn't be doing that in AO1 because I told you to save it for AO3 to start with. So that's really, really important. Also, Andy's emphasised quite a few times now, you must relate it to humans as well, so not talk about dogs. And then evaluated the experiment. Well, I've never told you to do that, so hopefully you've not done that either. Rather than discussing how this experiment may or may not have contributed to our understanding of human behaviour. So every single time at the end of all your evaluation points, and if you haven't done it, don't panic, because you have an opportunity to do it next time in the exam. Have you linked it back to human behaviour? This Pavlov's piece of research helped develop classical conditioning, which helps us understand human behaviour. Can you skim through? If you've mentioned human behaviour, can you underline it? Can you highlight it? That's really important for AO3, okay? Describe one behavioural characteristic that might be seen in a person who's been diagnosed with a phobia of wasps. Two things you've got to do here. Behavioural characteristic of phobia, you must mention wasps. So you would mention, and it's not just naming it, you've got to talk about it, describe it. So panic, which is behaviours such as crying, running, screaming and freezing, collapsing or vomiting in the presence of a wasp. So you must name it, you must explain it, and you must apply it. So avoidance, behaviours such as not going to places where wasps might be encountered, for example, gardens and seasides. Endurance, behaviours such as remaining in the presence of wasps, often frozen still because you can't leave a meeting. So I think the key one for me, what we talk about, is avoidance. So can you look at, see if you've mentioned wasps? If you haven't mentioned wasps, no marks. So to get the 2 marks, you need to do 3 things. You need to name it, you need to explain it, you need to contextualise it. If you've done all those things, you can get 2 marks. Just naming it, you won't get any marks at all. So you've got to explain and contextualise. Exactly the same thing here, emotional characteristics, and again, application to wasps. So for example, anxiety, and you wouldn't get any marks just for saying anxiety, but you get marks for explaining that. So anxiety, feelings of worry and distress, 1 mark. In the presence of wasps, 2 marks. Fear, feelings of terror, feelings of being scared, 1 mark. About dying from a wasp sting, 2 marks. Name it, explain it, contextualise it. Okay, for 3 things, I know it's frustrating for only 2 marks, but there we go. Again, just naming it, not enough. Okay, explain how a hierarchy and relaxation might be used to treat someone who has a phobia of wasps. So there's 3 things you need to do here. You need to talk about hierarchy, you need to talk about relaxation, you need to talk about wasps. What you don't do is just go through the steps of systematic desensitization. Okay, you only talk about the hierarchy and you only talk about relaxation. So you get 1 mark for explaining how the hierarchy is created. It's a list designed by the therapist and the client together, from least feared to most feared situation. If you made any reference to the client and the therapist developing, or even just the client developing the hierarchy from most to least feared, then that's great, that's 1 mark. And then 1 mark for applications. So they will identify fearful situations involving wasps, such as seeing a picture of a wasp, seeing one in a jar, and then having one flying around the room with them. Again, whatever you want, as long as it's contextualised. 1 mark for relaxation. The client client will use relaxation by controlling their breathing, focusing, visualizing peaceful scenes, using anti-anxiety drugs, progressive muscle relaxation, any of those. My guess would be you did breathing, with application to a wasp, so that you'd show them a picture of a wasp and they would use their breathing techniques to calm them. So tell me what hierarchy is, apply it to wasps. Tell me what relaxation is, apply it to wasps. So that's 4 marks. No application, no marks. No, that's not fair, actually. 1 mark if you lose 2 marks. If no application, the maximum you can get is 2 marks, 1 for explaining the hierarchy and 1 for explaining what relaxation is. Okay. Anything else you've talked about? Not really. In classical systematic desensitization is not really relevant at this point. Many responses did not focus upon the question and appeared to have pre-planned answers. Bad, don't do that. They purposely don't want to see you not doing that, so kind of developing your answer around the question. As a consequence, many responses didn't include information to the hierarchy or to relaxation, and some didn't do A. If you look down here, A or 2, some didn't apply. So you must make sure it's linked back to the question specifically that it's asking about, and you must also apply it to wasps. Outline the use of one or more drugs in the treatment of OCD. So you would get a mark for just saying it's attempting to increase or decrease levels of neurotransmitters in the brain, which I don't think you would have been that general, but you get marks for that. Then you want to talk about SSRIs increasing serotonin levels. If you've done that, give yourself a tick. They do this by blocking the reuptake channels or the transporters. Either term is absolutely fine, give yourself a tick, which reduces the amount of serotonin, reduces the amount of, that's not right, 1 second. Apologies. This is why at this point I'm saying it. Don't worry too much about what you're getting right or wrong. It's all about focusing on how you can improve. Apologies about that. So it reduces the amount of serotonin being reabsorbed through reuptake, increasing the amount of serotonin in the synaptic gap. So the reuptake channels are blocked, therefore reducing the amount of serotonin being uptaken, increasing the amount that can bind to receptors on the postsynaptic neuron. Okay. Discuss one or more cognitive explanations for depression. So you get 12 marks for this one. You could talk about faulty and irrational internal mental processes, Ellis's irrational belief ABC model and masturbatory thinking. If you pause, you can look through and check what you should have been talking about there. For that one, you could talk about Beck, which is specific to depression, biased thinking and lack of perceived control, negative schema and any things listed under there, the negative triad, which as you can see on the right here is the self, the world and the future. So if you have a look at that example, think what you'd include. And the evaluation points, again, have you got a strength or weaknesses? Give it a tick. If you talked about an example, give it a tick. If you talked about this is an example because, give it a tick. Even if you haven't used that sentence started like that, make sure you've made it clear why the example is an example of, for example, practical applications of cognitive behavioural cognitive approach. And then this is a strength or a weakness because, give it a tick. And again, if you've got however, that's even better, but don't worry too much if you haven't. Practical applications, CBT, issues and debates, it acknowledges free will, which is a good thing. Contrast to alternatives, doesn't consider biological explanations, and supporting evidence, you've got the 65 pregnant women. Okay, so the key thing there is if you've given those as examples, have you explained why they're examples? Why is this research supporting? Why is CBT an example of application? Okay. Knowledge of one or more cognitive explanation of depression is accurate and well detailed. Your discussion is effective. Have you done all those things you should have done in the AO3? You might have missed something out. Don't panic too much about that if it's only a little bit. The answer is clear and coherent. Specialist terminology is used. Again, can you skim through your answer and underline where you've used any specialist terminology, validity, reliability, internal mental processes, all of those different things. Okay. Explain why it's important to match students on their high level of interest in business studies. So level of interest could affect their satisfaction scores, so need to be controlled. Matching students' levels of interest in business study keeps this participant variable constant. So a key thing you need to do there, can you underline it, is have you mentioned business studies and satisfaction scores? Can you underline both of those things? If you then given answers which roughly match with the bullet points there, then you can get the mark, but you must contextualise on their high levels of interest in business studies. It's related directly to business studies. Suggest one variable which the researcher could have matched, which is 1 mark. So interest in computers, past experience of computers, disability issues, prior knowledge and enjoyment of business studies. Anything you can think of that's similar. If you've got a different one that's similar, that's fine. This is explaining extraneous variable, something which affects the IV but isn't the DV. So the next 2, so you get 1 mark. 1 mark is telling me the problem, the variable that's being controlled. The other mark is saying how it would affect satisfaction scores. So the definition of an extraneous variable, which this is something which affects the DV that isn't the IV. So you need to then reword that into contextualised answer. So people might find their enjoyment of business studies is increasing their satisfaction scores, DV, so the satisfaction score is their DV, not how many hours it is online or in the classroom. So they might find it's their enjoyment of the business studies, so you've mentioned the EV, that's 1 mark, is increasing their satisfaction scores, so the DV, not how many hours it is online or in the classroom. You've made the IV clear. And if you've done both of that, you get all 2 marks for that. Outline the benefits of allocating students randomly to the different number of online hours. So 2 marks for a clear answer, only 1 mark if you haven't done any application. If the researcher can decide who goes in which condition, then they might put the students best at business in a certain condition, say on the most online hours. So they can choose, there you go, you're explaining in this the application. Increasing the validity, as the researcher will not be biased in how students are allocated, as they can't choose who has how many hours online. So again, the application, how many hours online, or removal of participant bias, as each participant has the same chance of having a particular number of hours online as any other participant. Can you check? If you haven't applied, you get 1 mark. If you have applied and you have explained, you get 2 marks. So explain about stratified sampling. This is the other one. So this is how it might be an improvement. So you must draw comparisons and say how it's better than how it was in the pilot study. So stratified sampling ensures that identified subgroups of the whole target population is represented in the sample, so you can generalise the results. So if you talk about the sample being representative and you can generalise it to the target population, that's 2 of your marks. But to get those marks, you then also need to make sure that you're drawing a comparison, and it's more valid or more representative or more generalisable than if the participants were just were just available at the time of being asked, i.e. an opportunity, which is what the pilot was. Or you could say stratified as an improvement because the people who are identified by opportunity are likely to be present at the same time doing similar things, which may limit representativeness. You've mentioned opportunity, 1 mark. You've said they're similar, 2 marks. You've said it's limited representativeness, 3 marks. Make sure you've drawn a comparison and given and talked about the strength of stratified or the weakness of opportunity. This is my example of a question that might develop qualitative data. What did you dislike or like about the online learning lessons? That would be 1. Explain why is always my cheat. So whatever your answer, if they're asking for qualitative, it must be explain why. If you could give a 1-word answer or a numeric answer to the question you've asked, so it could be yes, no, you could just say 10. If you say 1 thing, if you're not forced to give me more information, then that is a closed question and you want an open one. So just double check that, okay? Explain 1 problem the researcher might have in analysing qualitative data collected from the questionnaires. So these are some of the answers. I'll just give you the first one, and you want to pause the slides, you can look at the others. Analysis of qualitative data relies on interpretation by the researcher, 1 mark, which could be inaccurate or biased or subjective, the 2nd mark, okay? So make your point and tell me why it's a problem. So you're talking about problems, so strengths and weakness, weakness. So weakness is that the data relies on interpretation. This is a weakness because it could be inaccurate. Okay, must be relevant to questionnaires. Again, 1 ethical issue must be related to questionnaires, treated with respect by explaining their answers about class will be kept confidential, assured they can withdraw their satisfaction scores if they want to, or the students must be told exactly what the researchers are trying to find out about the relationship between satisfaction and the way the information was delivered. Okay, so make sure that your ethical issue is related. The next one, you get a 1 mark for an appropriate title which must include reference to relationship and the 2 variables. So can you look at your title? Have you used the word relationship? Give it a tick. Have you talked about variable 1? Give it a tick. Variable 2? Give it a tick. There you go. You've got a mark for the title. Axis, number of online hours. So you must operationalise it, you must give it a number of online hours in a scale from 0 to 10, and satisfaction score, again operationalise the number and a suitable scale of 0 to 20. So that, if you've done all of that, you get 3 marks, and you've got to have 11 points. So can you count if there's 11, and do they look like this? Have a look at the title again, satisfaction, the number of hours online, or does it look like this? Either way round is absolutely fine, okay? So again, look at the title, look at the 2 axes, check that you've named them correctly and that your answer looks like that. What conclusion might be drawn? You get 1 mark for saying a negative correlation or relationship, and you get another mark for explaining what that means. The more hours online, the less satisfied they are with the course, okay? So you tell me tell me what it is, negative relationship, tell me what a negative relationship goes up is. As one goes up, the other goes down. The more hours, so as the hours go up, the satisfaction scores go down, and that's how you get your 2 marks. Mark 1 for this one, mode was 19 and median was 12. Well done, give yourself a tick for both of those. Explain why the median would be more suitable. This one, the median is more representative than the mode because the mode is at the top end of the scores. They want you to directly apply this. They don't want generic. They don't want sort of, well, the problem with the median is this, that, the other. They want you to look specifically at the scores that you are looking at in your exam and tell me a problem specifically with these ones. And the one with this one is the mode is at the top end of the scores, so is not representative, whereas the median is closer, is numerically closer, or more of the scores are numerically closer to the median. So make sure it's specific, not a generic evaluation point, okay? So make sure you contextualize and look at the actual data. And look at the following descriptive statistics, which would indicate a negative skew, and that is B. Okay, so have a think about negative and positive skew, because that is a bit of a tricky one, and we need to know it, and we will go over it next year. Okay, so that's the end of the slideshow. I would like you to, on your, I'm going to collect your mock results back in your mock study. I'd like you to have written on the front or on the back, wherever there's space, or on a post-it or whatever you want to do, slip it, put it on some A4 paper inside of you. You must do this. A list of everything from the mock paper that you got correct. So go through everything you got ticks. If you did stratified sampling, write it down. If you got the mean right, write it down, in one column. In another column, everything that you didn't get full marks on. For example, if you didn't get full marks when you were talking about systematic desensitization, put that down. There you go. That second column is a list of everything you need to revise. And then the other thing I would like you to do is tell me if there's any particular exam techniques. Did you forget to contextualize? Did you forget to compare if it said benefit or improvement? I don't know, did you forget to use the word relationship when it was a correlation? Whatever it is, I'd like to write down something that you will do differently next week that will get you at least one more mark from exam technique wise. Okay, then you've got that column of things that you don't know, so I'd like you to revise those. If there's something that didn't come up on the exam that you're not confident with, then you can use that as well. Okay, thank you very much.